And so I feel like if we put our limited energy and our perfectionist lens into creating one really, really good piece of content, and then we can use it in so many different ways that bang for your buck, it's unparalleled.
Hey, Julia, welcome to the Teacher Biz Podcast.
Thank you so much. I am so excited for our conversation today.
Me too. Let's start. If we could talk just a little bit about who you are and what you do in your business, and then maybe how you got into this whole online business thing in the first place.
Yeah, so I am Julia Levine, and I am also known as the podcast teacher because I help introverted entrepreneurs start podcasts. And so, how I got here is a bit of a long story. And so, I'm going to try and condense it for you. But the key points are that I started out as an elementary school library media teacher. And I did that for about 12 years, and I loved so many aspects of it. But for a variety of reasons, including mental burnout and some health challenges, I needed to pivot a few years ago. And so I started out doing kind of behind the scenes podcast production work. I really wanted something that wasn't as physically demanding, that I could kind of do on my own schedule, that kind of thing. So I did that for a little while, and I just really missed teaching. And I knew I couldn't go back to what I was doing before. That just wasn't sustainable for so many reasons. But I tried to figure out how I could incorporate teaching into kind of my new career path. And so I decided to combine my passion for podcasts with my passion for teaching. And I started partnering with people one on one who wanted to start a podcast and teaching them how to do that. Kind of a combination of a done for you with the production side, but also a done with you with kind of the teaching component. And so I did that. I absolutely loved it, but I quickly maxed out my spots. And so this past year in 2023, I developed a group program called Podcast Startup Academy. And that allows me to really, even on a higher level, fulfill more of that teaching love and help a lot more people.
I love that. So the first thing I'm wondering is, did you know how to produce or edit podcasts before you left teaching?
I mean, kind of, sort of, but also not really. So I was still teaching in 2020 when, of course, we were learning online. And so, being the library media teacher, I was tasked with kind of entertainment during the virtual learning. And so I was asked to do kind of virtual read alouds. And so I would record myself reading a book, which is sort of like a podcast. And so I kind of had to learn some editing skills to do that during the teaching during the pandemic. And then once I decided to make a career out of it, I, of course, took some more advanced trainings and really up-leveled my skills beyond just those basics that got me through teaching.
I love that. I think so often teachers think that they can't learn something new because they've already invested so much time and money into, their education and certifications and everything that goes into being a teacher. And yet, there are so many options. There's so many skills that you can pick up, and you can still apply. What I love in your story here is that you can still apply your being a teacher, your teacher skills to wherever you decide to go from there. And so you learned all of these podcast skills. And then I love that evolution too. I want to highlight that for our listener. You learned the podcast skills, then you were doing it behind the scenes as a service-based business. You started
Mhm.
working one-on-one with people, which I wonder how you feel about that. Was it for you a really great way to get to know your customer and their pain points and what they're thinking?
It absolutely was. And honestly, if I could clone myself and have that one-on-one as a sustainable business model, I definitely would continue doing that. I love just the intimacy that you get with working with someone so closely. It's really a partnership when you're working one-on-one with someone. And I feel like I couldn't have just jumped from production into teaching a group course because I needed to per I don't like to use the word perfect because I get caught up in perfectionism sometimes and I try and get away from that. But I sort of perfected the process working one-on-one with people that then I was able to take that and transform it into a group setting.
I think that's just so smart. I agree with you. I don't think for anyone really one-on-one is sustainable with scaling in the long term. But it is so great in the beginning of a business to do something like one-on-one working with someone or small group coaching so that you can kind
Mhm.
of get in the head of your customer and get to know, their struggles and their feelings and the words that they use to talk about their problems. I love that for the beginning of a business. And then to transition to this place now where you are teaching podcasting, and that sounds so much more scalable. It's something that people are so interested in, and to use your teacher skills with this new skill that you acquired. I just love that. And I think it will be really inspiring for the teachers listening to this who want to do something else and aren't really sure what that is and feel maybe closed off in their options, that there is just so much available to us.
Yeah, and I might be getting a little ahead of myself in the conversation here, but it was really, really difficult when I decided to leave teaching because, like probably most teachers, I didn't have a plan B. I signed up to be a teacher for 30 years and then retire. There was no other option. And so when it came to time that it was just obvious that I had to make a change, I knew in theory that I had some transferable skills, but in the moment, I was so exhausted. I was so desperate to get out of the situation that I was in and just tired. And I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I couldn't figure out how to put those transferable skills together in a way that sounded appealing and also, made it clear kind of what my next steps were. And so for me, I am super, super thankful that I have a really supportive husband who was a constant sounding board for me throughout the process. And I sought out some external support, which I think is one of the key things that really helped me get over that hurdle where I couldn't see the forest for the trees kind of situation. So I worked with a coach who brought kind of the outside perspective and helped me see that literally anything I wanted was a possibility. And so I had to figure out what are the elements that I want, what's important to me in this season of life. And so it was really helpful to have that outside perspective because I was in the dark place and just couldn't see how I could do something else. And I've heard that from a lot of other teacher friends as well, that they're like, I just don't know what else that I would do because teaching is my life. I didn't have a plan B, etc.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think we definitely have people in that position. And I'm sure we've both seen the teachers on the other end of that who probably should have left sooner and feel like there's no option for them. And then they ride it out till retirement half-heartedly, um, which never ends up to be the best situation. So I love that. I mean, I'm sure it was incredibly difficult to step away and figure things out in this whole new world. But I love that backwards thinking. Anything is possible and figure out how to make it happen. I love that so much. It's so inspiring. I think it will be really helpful for our listeners to hear this story. Um, and so one thing I wonder, because you have you have this business, can you share with us like the structure of where you find your customers? Like you had said you maxed out your one-on-one spaces, and now we know your business is evolving. So, how are people finding out about you? How are they coming into your world? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so people have come into my world for the one-on-one services. It has almost entirely been referrals. And so people who I launch one-on-one with, they talk to their friends, they talk to their network, and then other people connect with me from there. And so I really wasn't doing any marketing of any kind or any intentional list building or reaching out or visibility strategies, anything like that, which is wonderful, but also there aren't there are only limited one-on-one spots. And so when I decided to make the pivot to a group program, that's when I kind of had to really get more strategic about how people were going to connect with me and find me. And that definitely has been one of the more challenging parts in my business. So I did start my own podcast, and that's been really enjoyable. Of course, it's still in its infancy, so it's just taking off, but I'm really excited about that going forward. I also have participated in a lot of digital bundles where I give away a digital product. Usually, the bundle is either free or a very low cost, and the participants get access to all of these different digital resources. And so I provide a resource that they would be hopefully interested in. They opt into that resource, they get the value from that resource, and they are also added to my email list. So then I can continue to follow up, nurture them, connect with them, and then, of course, present my other offerings. And probably the last thing that's really helped me connecting with potential customers is just networking and being active in different groups and memberships. So I know you and I connected from Amy Porterfield's Momentum membership, and I've met so many wonderful folks in there. And then I'm in a couple other programs that have a kind of a group networking component as well. And so that has been really fruitful for my business as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting to be in kind of those B2B spaces where you have this business that applies to other online business owners. And I'm sure you can offer, such valuable advice being, you know, kind of an expert in podcasting with this experience under your belt. So that's pretty cool. I like that. And I like the scrappy strategy of contributing to bundles too. That's not something that people would think of firsthand on how am I going to find people, but I love that, and using it as a list builder in that way. Since we're talking about podcasting and that's your area of expertise, I wonder if someone's listening right now and they're thinking about podcasting, or maybe they're not really sure, what a podcast could do to a business. Do you have any advice for them when it comes to either why they should start a podcast or how a step to take in, like the early stages of thinking about having a podcast?
Yes, so I may be a little biased because I am the podcast teacher, but I think that podcasting is one of the best visibility strategies. It's there's so many benefits to it that I'd be here for an hour if I told you everything. But kind of just to hit the key points, it's an immediate authority builder. It immediately gives you credibility to tack on podcast host to your resume or to your bio. And so people, when they listen to a podcast, they really get to know the real you, how you talk, the words you use, slang. I tend to say things like holy bananas. And you would never know that about me unless you hear me talk in real life. And so they're a way to really accelerate that know, like, and trust factor with your audience. They build immediate credibility, authority. They are evergreen, meaning that they live forever on the internet. They are not subject to an algorithm in the same way that social media is ruled by an algorithm. And so, someone could be searching for information. years down the line and find your podcast and connect with you. And you haven't done an ounce of work on that podcast episode in years. And so it really, there's so many benefits. And the other one that I'll just hit on for a second before I ramble for too long is that it can be the kind of the cornerstone of your content strategy. You can repurpose your podcast into so many other things. And so you can turn it into a blog post and a LinkedIn article. You can record video and post it on YouTube if you're comfortable with that. You can take quotes and key points, put them on social media. It's content for your email list. There's really so many different things. And so, my audience, I focus on introverts, and we tend to be overthinkers and perfectionists. Not all of us, but we tend to gravitate in that direction. And so I feel like if we put our limited energy and our perfectionist lens into creating one really, really good piece of content, and then we can use it in so many different ways, that bang for your buck, it's unparalleled. And so I think that everyone should start a podcast.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Obviously, I'm a big fan of the podcast, having had this one. And that's exactly what we do with this show. I have the podcast audio, of course, comes out every Tuesday. And then we take the videos. I have a member of my team take clips those go up on YouTube. And she also turns it into a blog post that goes on teacherbiz.com. And I send an email every Tuesday to my list. I email them about other things too, but every Tuesday they get an email about the podcast. And social media, either I'll make some posts like a reel or something like that talking about the episode for the week, or I'll make an audiogram from the episode of the week. You mentioned that you serve introverts as your customers. And so can you talk to us about that and this whole being an introvert as an entrepreneur and still putting yourself out there in your business, all of that? Because I know we have people listening who are definitely afraid to put themselves out there, as I think most of us are in the beginning stages of our business, and might feel like because I'm not super into having all the spotlight on me, maybe online business isn't my path. And so I'd love to hear you speak to that.
That is a very good question, because that is definitely something that I have struggled with as an introvert. And it is really scary to put yourself out there. I think introverts and perfectionists tend to get even more caught up in that. But even for the average person who maybe doesn't identify with those traits so much, it is scary to be visible. There are so many what ifs. What if somebody leaves me a bad review? What if, someone makes a meme of me, like all these things that when your brain gets into that spiral, it just goes into all of these scenarios that probably in 5 million years would never happen, but that's what our brains do. And our brains want to keep us safe, and our brains define safety as the same thing. No changes, nothing different. And so our brain is just doing its job. And so a couple of things that have helped me personally to kind of put myself out there is reminding myself that my brain is just doing its job, and I get to make all of the decisions. That's the reptilian part of your brain that wants to keep you safe, that survival instinct type of thing. And so we as evolved beings have that prefrontal cortex. We can make educated and informed decisions, and we can overrule those reptilian instincts. And so remembering that helps me. And then telling myself that everything I want is on the other side of fear. And so just keeping that in mind, that I'm never going to get to find out what's on the other side if I don't go over there. And so keeping that mantra in mind has helped me. And then I talk about this in one of my first podcast episodes, but me starting a podcast makes complete sense for my business model. But I was so caught up in the overthinking and perfectionism because I'm the podcast teacher. Of course, my podcast has to be perfect, the shining example of what it is to podcast. And that held me back for such a long time. And in one of my first episodes, I talked about how I was listening to the Mel Robbins podcast, which is one of my favorites. And she had an episode, I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but it was about magic words that like change your perspective. And the magic words were, what if it all works out? And so I turned those what ifs of, what if people think I don't know what I'm talking about because my podcast isn't perfect? I'm not doing all the things that I tell people that they should be doing. What if, what if, what if? I turned those around into what if it all works out? What if this podcast helps me reach more people and make a bigger impact and help more people on their journey? What if starting my podcast is the best thing I've ever done in my business? And you won't know until you try. And so while it's scary, for sure, definitely asking that what if question helps get over that hurdle a bit for me.
I love that so much. I think that is such good advice to the teachers listening right now who are in that what if stage. I know them. I know they are so stuck in all of those thoughts. What if my students find me and my business on the internet? For the teachers who are still in the classroom and trying to build this thing, you know, I felt when I first started my little blog I was telling you about, I had this thought, what if people from high school, who, by the way, I do not speak to anymore and were not important in my life, what if they see my business and think it's lame? Like, who cares? What if it's awesome? I love that. I want to highlight what Julia just said to us. She said she thinks this can be scary and I can do it anyway. And everything I want is on the other side of that fear. That is just, I mean, I want to blow that up and skywrite it. It is absolutely true. And I just think that mindset is so important for the teachers listening right now that want to make that difference in the world and are stuck in that cycle of all the things that could go wrong.
Yes, that was definitely part of my fears. I talked a little bit earlier about the struggle that I had of just the exhaustion, desperation, and just the what am I going to do when I leave teaching and asking those what if questions. I hadn't heard that Robbins episode at that point in time and hadn't kind of made that shift. But yeah, if you're in that space of being like something has to change, but what if, what if, what if? That is a powerful strategy for me personally to turn it around and go into the positive what ifs.
I love that so much. Do you have any other advice that you'd want to share to our teacher listeners who are just getting started in their business? I mean, we talked about you're pushing through those mindset blocks, but anything else that you'd want to share with them to kind of, encourage them in those early stages?
I think that the biggest thing that I would say in terms of advice is to find a community that you can surround yourself with other online business owners. They're going to give you inspiration that this is possible because you're seeing other people do it in that community. They are also going to provide you with support. Almost all of them struggled at some point in their journey as well, probably all of them, maybe if they won't admit it. But they can support you as you are struggling with whatever you're dealing with in the moment, and they can help kind of guide you along. And so finding a community of other business owners, maybe even like a specific coach that can work with you one on one. That's been something that's been instrumental for me and getting over my blocks. And I think the power of community is just so important. Even as an introvert and someone who kind of limits my social interactions because it drains my energy battery so quickly, that is a worthwhile use of my energy because I just get so much The communities love to lift you up and encourage you when you're having a tough time. And they love to provide insights, things, lessons that they've learned along the way as well. So that would be my number one tip is find a community.
I love that. And I will say for our listeners that it's always been really important to me to have a community aspect of my Teacher Biz programs. So if they're looking for a community of other online business owner teachers, Teacher Biz Blueprint will be opening up in early 2024, Q1 for sure, and they can find their community there. And will you share with us just a little bit about how your teacher skills have carried over into this very new world of online business and how you've been able to use, your skills, your skill set as a teacher in this whole new world?
Yes, absolutely. And there are so many transferable skills. So I'll just highlight a couple of them. I think one of the biggest ones is experience with curriculum design and kind of organization of information, knowing the order in which to teach different components and kind of what builds on each other. I have been in a lot of programs where maybe some things are not quite taught in a logical order, and the information just there's a lot of gaps, there's a lot of things missing. And so I think as teachers, we have a unique ability to kind of rewind and kind of put ourselves in the shoes of where our ideal avatar is in their journey and kind of figure out everything that needs to go in, maybe not everything, but most things that need to go in to whatever we're teaching them to get them from point A to point B. And I think that is a unique skill to people who have had teaching experience. And it's definitely not in a lot of programs. And I kind of took that for granted that that was a skill of mine until I started taking some more programs and realizing that not everybody can put things in a logical order and explain things very well. And one of the other things is understanding different learning styles. And so, as I mentioned, I have kind of niched down into helping introverts. And in addition to being an introvert, my ideal client typically needs a little bit more detail, a little bit more personal support. They tend to be those perfectionists, those overthinkers, and they need someone to give them that stamp of approval that, like, this is good enough to move forward with. And so I really am tuned in to their needs a lot more than I find some other course creators are, at least from my experience as a student in other courses. And I do think that comes from being a teacher and kind of knowing what different accommodations students need and like noticing that, so and so does better when I present the information this way, or so and so does better when they work with a partner or whatever it is. Kind of figuring out what works for each individual student. And obviously, depending on your course model, maybe that's not feasible for you to evaluate and interact with each individual student, but you have that background knowledge of generality of knowing that some people learn better through visual material. Some people prefer audio. Some people learn while doing it. And so doing those active exercises, the pulling out the materials and just actually doing it. So for in my case, actually pulling out the microphone, pulling up the software and just kind of experimenting. That works really well for some people, whereas other people, they want that step-by-step video. They want every single instruction to watch it 3 times before they even touch their microphone. And so just knowing that there are different learning styles and kind of making your course adaptable enough to all of the different kinds of people that are going to come in, I think is something that teachers can really shine at.
You're so right. I think teachers are actually perfect for online business because we already know how to teach. We know how to scaffold information. We can deliver things in a way that makes sense. that point about knowing different learning styles is another thing that I think we just take for granted. And people who are not teachers do not even consider that. They just hand you something in one form. So I think that's a really good point too. And it's one of those things. You're so right. We just take for granted all of these skills that we've acquired over the years because if I know how to do this, doesn't everyone? And no, they don't. And you're special and you have a leg up because you're a teacher.
Yes, 100%.
Julia, tell us what you're working on right now and what you're excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, as we're wrapping up here, in case anyone is like me and you tend to forget the guest's name by the end of the episode, I'll just say again that I am Julia Levine and I am also known as the podcast teacher. People can find me on my podcast, which is called Podcasting for Introverts. And the thing that I'm so excited about is that enrollment for the next cohort of my podcast Startup Academy opens on January 11th. And this academy contains everything A to Z that you need to launch your podcast, including tech tutorials, plug and play templates, a private podcast feed so you can listen on the go, and most of all, personalized feedback from me every step of the way. There is an enrollment cap so that it can be sure to give each person the individual attention that I am promising them. And I invite just anyone listening, if you are thinking about starting a podcast, you can check out the Academy. It's at thepodcastteacher.com/startup.
Thank you so much. I think that will be really helpful to people listening who are considering podcasting. And I think this whole story has probably been really inspiring to our listeners who I'm sure we have so many that can relate to you and that whole process of coming into this online business world. Thank you so much for being here, Julia, and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you for having me, Heather. This has been a really wonderful conversation.